Welcome back to Racing Rundown here on YouTube. I'm Eric DeCoster. In this Kentucky Derby profile, we'll be taking a look at Classic Causeway, the newest addition to this year's Kentucky Derby field. It's been a winding road, to say the least, for Classic Causeway to get to this point in the Kentucky Derby starting gate. Something we probably didn't think we would have to say a couple months ago. It's just been interesting, to say the least. Classic Causeway was one of the most consistent horses on the Kentucky Derby Trail until running in the Florida Derby. His most recent start, he was then taken off the Kentucky Derby Trail immediately after that. He came out of the race, no real injuries, no real excuses. We'll dive more into that towards the end of this, of course, and in watching the Florida Derby. But just plain and simple, nothing really happened in the Florida Derby to make him run poorly, and he was therefore taken out of Kentucky Derby consideration. Well, there were some inklings that he potentially could be running over the last few days. He worked in the window at Churchill Downs in the mornings, restricted only to horses set to run in the Kentucky Derby or Oaks. He did track work at that time, so kind of a hint there. And then there were some rumblings maybe he could be back in the game with the good work. And sure enough, today, as I'm recording this Monday, April 25th, he is back in the Kentucky Derby, 100% confirmed to run. Julian Leparoux will ride for the first time, so a lot of moving pieces here. Of course, that bumps a horse in Pioneer of Medina out as things stand. He could still very well get in. So it's interesting. A lot of trainers pulling some things out that we have not seen in the points era. But let's dive into it. We're going to watch his last four starts. He ran his first two races, broke his maiden by over 6 at Saratoga in extremely fine fashion. Went off favored in the Breeders' Futurity. Ran a very big race there. Almost went wire to wire from an outside post. Tired down the lane. Ran third. Now let's get into his third start. This is the Kentucky Jockey Club from Churchill Downs, the most productive 2-year-old prep of the campaign. Plenty of graded stakes winners came out of this race, and Classic Causeway was one of them. Here he is breaking from the rail. He gets away great. I mean, this is the position you want. And that's going to be a recurring theme we see. His gate speed is impeccable, and that's going to play a huge factor in the Kentucky Derby. Right there, you see him. The three horses to his outside all wanted it more than him. So Joel Rosario, who's aboard here, it's the only time he ever rode Classic Causeway, he takes back, and that's different. Classic Causeway had been on the lead in his first three career starts, or his first two career starts, and then you saw him break sharp enough to where he could have been there. But he's going to take back now, and right now the leader's Howling Time. Runner up is, or the horse in second, excuse me, is Ben Diesel. White Abarrio is third. Those are three horses who all competed on the Kentucky Derby Trail this year. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them, especially White Abarrio, your Florida Derby winner. And right now, Classic Causeway is traveling well, maybe pulling a little. Joel Rosario, you can see his hands getting a little tight there. He's not wanting the horse to do too much, but the horse is wanting to do a bit more. But nevertheless, he's there. He's traveling. To his outside is the eventual winner, Smile Happy. But all things considered, Classic Causeway has seemingly adapted to a new circumstance in very fine fettle. Now they're rolling into the far turn. He is looming up dangerously. And you can see right there, he's the one horse. He's 7-5. He was the heavy favorite heading into this spot. Of course, he doesn't win. He only finishes behind Smile Happy. And then as they come down the stretch, you'll see the couple of horses that he finishes in front of that eventually do go on to do some pretty decent things on the Kentucky Derby Trail. But here you can kind of tell that Smile Happy is running a huge race. Classic Causeway is doing his best to keep up with him, but at the end of the day, he's going to be second best. But what I really loved about this performance from Classic Causeway, and what kind of stamped him as a pretty legitimate horse for 2022 and as a 3-year-old on the Kentucky Derby Trail, was his ability to adapt here. He does not necessarily need to be on the lead. He can run a huge race. He just lost to a monster on the day in Smile Happy, and of course finished in front of White Abarrio, who was third, Call Me Midnight, who was back there in seventh. Those two went on to win big graded stakes down the road. So this was a huge performance from Classic Causeway in unideal circumstances. In his first start of 2022, Classic Causeway emerged in the Sam F. Davis Grade 3 at Tampa Bay Downs, 10-point Derby prep. This was on February 12th. He's the three horse, and he got out very quickly once again, set on getting to the lead. And there was a lot of early speed in this race. You can see it kind of showing itself there to the outside. The 13-horse Little Vic is going to go up and challenge the two horses directly in behind him. The one in that blue check sleeves, he wanted to lead badly. He wasn't able to get there. That line right in behind him at the end of the day, there were 5 horses who could have easily been in front early on, but Classic Causeway was just quick enough. And you can see his ears are pricked. He's going at a fine tempo. The pace is quick, 22 and 3/5 for an opening quarter. That is very fast, much quicker than he'd ever gone in his career to this point. He'd always, when he's been able to make the lead, had gone fast, but never this fast. And you see the horse to the outsides getting rank. they're just going at a breakneck speed right now, but he's taking it all within in stride. The half just flashed. They're still going fast. 46 and 3/5 there, and rolling into the far turn though. Irad Ortiz Jr., who has ridden him in all three starts this year, but will not ride him in the Kentucky Derby. He'll be on Mo Donegal, but he's still sitting chilly. I mean, he has not asked this horse for much, and he's responding to the cues that he's going to give him right now, where he's just shakes the reins at him ever so slightly, and the horse goes on with it very well. However, there is one problem with this race, and it'll be a problem with the Tampa Bay Derby that we'll watch next, and then make the Florida Derby look all the more concerning. You look at the horses in behind Classic Causeway, our subject here. None of them are in the Kentucky Derby this year, and none of them really ran well in their final preps. Volcanic ran up the track in the Bluegrass. He's the horse in the purple cap there. Shipsational was off the Derby trail with an injury. Strike Hard ran up the track in the Florida Derby, right? So Classic Causeway just dominated. But did he really dominate high caliber horses? Certainly not, based off of their, performances following this. And once again, that'll be pretty apparent in the Tampa Bay Derby. So this is the Tampa Bay Derby. He's the 4 horse. Shakes out of there like an absolute quarter horse. I mean, that is ridiculously fast, especially for a horse that we know will want to be forwardly placed. He puts himself in the position very early on. He'll be clearing into the first turn right here. I mean, he's in the 2-path, but he'll eventually just set up shop and go on with it. Once again, plenty of pressers. He has one to his inside who's making him work for it. We see a Giant Game there to the outside. He was third in a Breeders' Cup. And then right behind him is some more speed that we saw from that last race, the Sam Davis. The fraction's much kinder here. You'll see that throughout. The quarter is very reasonable. The half gets more reasonable. The 3/4 becomes absolutely perfect for any horse who finds himself on the lead in the early stages of a race. And he's coasting once again. He looks exactly like he did in the Sam Davis last time out. He's been put into the most ideal position imaginable, and he is just rolling right now. And obviously there's pressures coming from around him, but he's handling well. Asked a little bit earlier here, which is surprising because, as I mentioned, he did go much slower. That's basically 48 and 1/5 seconds. It's going to read 48 flat in the form, but at the end of the day, that's closer to 48 and 1. So he is really, really coasting around there. And now he's just going to start to open up again. But one thing is, he didn't really put them away like he did in the Sam Davis. And I think part of that did have to do with the slow pace because the horses that do place in this race, Grantham at the rail and Shipsational on the outside, they were obviously within a length or so of him throughout this race, and they were also aided by the slow fractions Classic Causeway enforced. So that's why I think the margin of victory is kind of ho-hum here, not something that needs to be analyzed too well, because he took care of them the way that he needed to, given the circumstances, but they were also aided by that slow pace. Now, he did have to be asked more down the stretch, Classic Causeway was, but nevertheless, this was a good performance. But there are some negatives. He did regress on both Beyer and Brisnet and Equibase. Equibase he stayed the same, but Beyer and Brisnet, which are more reputable in my opinion than an Equibase figure, I think most would agree with that. That's a huge drop off. For Brisnet, he dropped 9 points from the Sam Davis from a 99, which a 99 in early February for one of these 3-year-olds on the Derby Trail, that is very strong. That is very impressive. I believe only Messier had ran quicker at that time. But to drop to a 90 in your next start, I mean, that's bad, especially off of a win. Beyer, he only regrets 2 points, but 2 points is 2 points. I mean, that's not good. And then who knows? Was that maybe a suggestion of what was to come here in this next start? So that next start was, of course, the Florida Derby, which will be Classic Causeway's last race into the Kentucky Derby. And before we roll the tape, I do want to say it was kind of surprising to see him turn up in this spot. For me personally, I thought they should have just waited off that Tampa Bay Derby and head straight to the Kentucky Derby. I believe that's about 7 weeks in, which, yeah, I mean, that's a long break, but nowadays that's not killer. I'd rather come in off a 7-week break than run 3 races in close succession. And he was into this race off 3 weeks. The Tampa Bay Derby was March 12th. The Florida Derby is April 2nd. So a 3-week turnaround after 2 pretty solid races. That was a big cause for concern for me. Now I did like him in this spot because obviously the talent is there, but the quick comeback was definitely a big concern for me, especially when the Bluegrass was the next week. Brian Lynch has a big base in Kentucky. That's where he is when he's not down in Florida for the winter. And I was just very surprised that he didn't wait that extra week at least for the Bluegrass, which would have set him up 4 weeks to the Kentucky Derby, good, even 4-4. Well, now he's going to come back in 3 weeks. I still don't really understand it, but I do think that in addition to the regression on speed figures played a big factor into why he lost this. But in terms of the race itself, you're going to see that there are no excuses. He breaks like a champ here. He outbreaks himself, is how I'd like to put it, because he broke so fast. He kind of bobbled, but he is sent to the lead once again, showing the same exact speed he's shown in every single start. He is joined to the outside by simplification, and Papa Cap will be right there too. You see Wide Barrio and Charger, your eventual 1-2 finishers, setting up right in behind that first leading trio. For Classic Causeway, I love what he's doing though. He's traveling well within himself. He's on the front end. He looks exactly like he looked in his past 2 victories. And the quarter went up 23-3. That's perfectly even. Now he did kind of push it a little bit the second quarter though. It did go a bit quicker than that first fraction did, or at least it was close to equal. Which you typically, when you have a horse on the lead in a race, whatever quarter they fraction they put up there for that first quarter mile, you want it to be slower into the second. You want the internal fraction, so from the break to the first quarter mile, whatever time it is. But I ideally want that second fraction to be the quarter to the half to be a bit longer. And for him, it was not. He worked harder in that quarter to the half mile than he did from the break to the opening quarter. That is very concerning to me. And as you can see him, he's backing out right now. I think that really did work him over to some effect. But once again, that's not really much. I mean, that's more than enough, that those fractions, to stick around. And as you can see, simplification and Papa Cap, the horses that were sitting there with him, they're keeping on. They're firing on all cylinders still. They don't win, sure. They might have softened each other up enough. But for Classic Causeway, I'd at least like to watch you run third or fourth behind this bunch and not run last. It really just seemed like something was amiss this day, because we've seen him withstand tougher fractions than this and still get the job done. And he just didn't here. You see them all crossing the wire. I'll wait till we see Classic Causeway get across the line so you can truly see how far back he was. I mean, that is just not good. Kind of picking up there at the end. I won't lie. He did kind of re-rally once he realized everyone had passed him. But of course, you're beating 21 lengths. Doesn't really matter at that point. So, of course, as I mentioned, after that race, they took him off the Derby Trail. And now he's back. He does seem like he's working pretty well. Just a very interesting path here. And it's tough. It's really tough. This is a horse who seemed so good earlier this year that, I wasn't saying he was going to win the Derby, but he seemed like a sure thing to run pretty well if he just stayed on a good prep schedule. And then that last race just kind of threw everything up in the air. He's going to be ridden by Julian Leparoux in this spot, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode. That's fine with me. Really, being a speed horse, you just got to go and run. I don't really care who's aboard you. Obviously, rationing out that speed's an important part, but I think that's a lot easier than navigating through 19 horses, so that won't be a problem. I will discuss the pace implications that Classic Causeway does have, because they are very big. This will be Brian Lynch's first Kentucky Derby runner, so very excited to see that. The last 3 Beyers, you see the regression, and that's one of the cons I've laid out for him. And that's just not on Beyer, that's on Brisnet, Equibase. Of course, those numbers from the Sam Davis to the Tampa Bay Derby were the same, but then, of course, got worse in the Florida Derby. Yeah, he's the only horse with this pattern where it's just worse after worse Beyer figure he's putting forward leading into the Derby. And that's, of course, a big concern. I really don't know how many horses have regressed in 2 straight races heading into the Derby. I know Mandaloun got worse from the risen start of the Louisiana Derby last year, and then he won the Kentucky Derby in 2021. But he definitely did not have 2 bad efforts by Beyer standards, or 2 worse efforts from that start 3 ago. So the pros are the graded stakes ones, because we saw what he can do. He can go out there and dominate on the front end. He can go pretty quick, throw it down on his own, and still stick around and win by open lengths. That's what he did. The Kentucky Jockey Club was huge. He wants to be on the lead, but even if he doesn't find himself there, he can navigate it, and he can sit a good stalking trip like he did in the Kentucky Jockey Club, and he can still get the job done. And I think one pro, and this is going to sound a little crazy, but it really is. He didn't have excuses in the Florida Derby. I did mention maybe the quick turnaround, maybe he wasn't too happy with how quick he was going, but at the end of the day, that's not much. I mean, those are not concrete, 100% for sure excuses. And even the trainer, Brian Lynch, has said no excuses. And one of my favorite angles to play in graded stakes races is the horse who ran so badly last time out that the trainer has no excuses. It worked last year for Mandaloun. Brad Cox said he had no idea why his horse ran poorly in the Louisiana Derby. He could not figure it out, which is why he ran him in the Kentucky Derby. And then he won the Kentucky Derby. You can go back. I'm going to go back to the Muniz Memorial from about a month ago now, where 2 Emmys won that race at probably 5 or 6 to 1. And leading into that race, his trainer was just like, I have no idea what happened to back. I have absolutely no idea, so we're just going to throw him back at it and see what happens. And sure enough, he runs one of the better races of his career. So that's one thing. Usually when the trainer can't come up with it, that's when in my mind I'm like, okay, that was one bad effort. Let's see. I think they'll really improve here. They'll have the screws tightened. They're going to be looking for their A race, and the horse is going to be better for it as well. So that's one positive, in my opinion, on Classic Causeway. Obviously not a great one, but it's just an angle that has seemingly worked over and over again in graded stakes over the years. The cons, of course, running last in the Florida Derby, not going to do you any favors, uh, especially heading into such a wide open and tough Kentucky Derby where there does seem to be a lot of speed. I'll dive into it now. Summers tomorrow, the horse from Dubai, he was 100% going to be on the lead. Now I don't know because him and Classic Causeway, they break like quarter horses. They get out of the gates fast and they want to be in front. They've both shown it in pretty much every start of their career. Now, Classic Causeway, we know, is a bit more adaptable, but he wants to be on the lead. He wouldn't have done what he's done this year early on in the races if he didn't want to be on the lead. So those two are going to go at it. I think it's going to be a very, very quick pace in this year's Kentucky Derby. That does no favors for Classic Causeway. And he just really hasn't beaten much. His 3 wins have come against Maiden Company, of course, and then the wins in Tampa were against B-rate horses. That's a fact. None of those horses are running in the Kentucky Derby on the first Saturday in May. None of them came close to running in the Kentucky Derby on the first Saturday in May. So once again, another cause for concern. The wins were impressive, but what did you beat? And we already talked about the regression on figures. That's just straight up not good. That's very bad to be on that trajectory heading into the Kentucky Derby. But he is training well, and of course, if that's something you really love to look at heading into the Kentucky Derby, then that might be your thing. I don't know. I really do like this horse. If you asked me in January who I thought were among the 3 most likely Kentucky Derby winners, this was one I would have said. I'm pretty sure I wrote in places that he was going to be one of those horses, but the Florida Derby was not good enough, and the circumstances how he's gotten here do not play into his hand at all. So who knows? He really could step up. He does have some great positives in his corner. He has great Churchill Downs experience from the one race. We know he can hang with some of the best. He beat the Florida Derby winner last November, and he wasn't that far off Smile Happy, who was the future wager favorite in terms of individuals for most of the season. So he is not a bad horse. A bad horse doesn't run like that until that last start. I don't really know what to make of it. It's just too risky for me at this point, but he is a very nice horse. And if those positives, of course, sit well with you, then who knows? Maybe he could still hit the border. Who knows? Maybe he could carry his speed 1.25 miles and go all the way. There's no telling. Very unique situation, but good to see him in the Derby because he is one I do think deserves to be here based off of his resume. So I'm happy to see him make it in. That's all I have for you guys on this Kentucky Derby profile. We'll see you next time here on Racing Rundown.